Battle of Panipat, 1526. The Battle of Panipat, fought in 1526, was a crucial battle that changed the course of Indian history. It was fought between the Mughal Emperor Babur and the Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi. The battle resulted in the establishment of the Mughal Empire in India, which would go on to dominate Indian politics and culture for centuries. The Mughals were a Central Asian tribe that had established an empire in India after defeating the Sultanate of Delhi. Babur was the founder of the Mughal Empire, and he had been seeking to expand his territory in India. The Sultan of Delhi, Ibrahim Lodi, was a powerful ruler who controlled much of northern India. Babur saw Lodi as a threat to his ambitions and decided to attack him. The battle took place on April 21, 1526, near the town of Panipat in present-day Haryana. Babur's army consisted of around 15,000 men, while Lodi's army was much larger, numbering around 1 lakh soldiers. However, Lodi's army was not as well organized as Babur's, and the Mughal army had superior artillery and cavalry. The battle was fought in 2 phases. In the first phase, Babur's army advanced towards Lodi's army and began firing their artillery. Lodi's army responded with their own artillery, but they were no match for the Mughal cannons. Babur then ordered his cavalry to charge towards Lodi's army, and the 2 sides clashed in a fierce battle. Babur's army was able to break through Lodi's lines, and Lodi was killed in the fighting. With the death of Lodi, the Sultanate of Delhi was effectively destroyed, and the Mughal Empire was established. Babur went on to conquer much of northern India, and his descendants would rule over India for centuries. Battle of Plassey, 1757. The Battle of Plassey, fought on June 23, 1757, was a pivotal moment in Indian history as it marked the beginning of British rule in India. The battle was fought between the British East India Company and the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah. The British East India Company had been trading in India for over a century, and they had established several trading posts along the coast. However, they had little political power and were often at the mercy of the local rulers. The Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, was a powerful ruler who controlled much of eastern India, including the important city of Calcutta. The British East India Company had become increasingly frustrated with Siraj-ud-Daulah's policies towards them, which they saw as hostile. They decided to take action and sent an army to depose Siraj-ud-Daulah and install a more favorable ruler. The battle was fought near the village of Plassey in present-day West Bengal. The British army, led by Robert Clive, numbered around 3,000 soldiers, while the Nawab's army had around 50,000 soldiers. However, the Nawab's army was poorly equipped and poorly trained, while the British had superior weapons and tactics. The battle began with the British firing their artillery at the Nawab's army, which responded with their own artillery. The British then advanced towards the Nawab's lines, and the 2 sides clashed in a fierce battle. However, the Nawab's army was no match for the British, and they were quickly defeated. The Battle of Plassey was a significant victory for the British, and it marked the beginning of their dominance in India. The East India Company was granted the right to subscribe for Noble Notion, to collect taxes in Bengal, which gave them a significant source of revenue. They also gained political power and influence, and over the years, they would go on to establish their control over much of India. First War of Indian Independence, 1857. The First War of Indian Independence, also known as the Indian Rebellion of 1857, was a major uprising against British rule in India. The rebellion began on May 10, 1857, in the town of Meerut, when Indian soldiers of the British East India Company's army rebelled against their British officers. The rebellion quickly spread throughout northern India, with Indian soldiers, civilians, and local rulers joining the rebellion. The British initially struggled to contain the rebellion, as they were caught off guard and did not have enough troops in India to deal with the uprising. However, they were eventually able to bring the rebellion under control through a combination of military force and diplomacy. The rebellion had far-reaching consequences for India. While it ultimately failed to overthrow British rule, it highlighted the growing discontent among Indians towards British rule and helped to galvanize the Indian independence movement. It also led to a number of reforms in India, including the abolition of the East India Company and the establishment of direct British rule over India. Anglo-Afghan War, 1839 to 1842. The Anglo-Afghan War was a military conflict between the British Empire and the Afghan Emirate. The conflict was sparked by British concerns about Russian influence in Afghanistan, as well as a desire to establish a buffer zone between British India and the Russian Empire. The British initially succeeded in occupying Afghanistan and installing a puppet ruler, Shah Shuja, on the throne. However, the occupation was met with fierce resistance from Afghan tribes, who launched a guerrilla war against the British. The war was characterized by brutal fighting, with both sides committing atrocities against civilians and prisoners of war. The British suffered significant losses, including the infamous massacre of their retreating army at the Gandamak Pass. The war ultimately ended in a British retreat from Afghanistan and the failure of the British to establish a stable puppet government in the country. The war highlighted the difficulties of imposing Western-style governance on non-Western societies, and it would serve as a cautionary tale for future colonial powers. Second Anglo-Sikh War, 1848 to 1849. The Second Anglo-Sikh War was a conflict between the British Empire and the Sikh Empire, which controlled much of present-day northern India and Pakistan. The conflict was sparked by tensions between the British and the Sikh Empire over territorial disputes and the control of Punjab. The war was marked by a series of intense battles, including the Battle of Chilliawala and the Battle of Gujarat. The British eventually emerged victorious, and the Sikh Empire was dissolved, with its territories being annexed by the British. The war had significant consequences for both the British and the Sikhs. The British were able to consolidate their control over northern India and expand their empire, while the Sikhs suffered a significant loss of power and influence. The war also highlighted the tensions between the British and the Indian princes and rulers, and it would set the stage for future conflicts and uprisings against British rule. Third Anglo-Maratha War, 1817 to 1818. The Third Anglo-Maratha War was a conflict between the British East India Company and the Maratha Empire, which controlled much of western and central India. The conflict was sparked by tensions between the British and the Marathas over territorial disputes and the control of India. The war was marked by